BBC 4.
At 10 o'clock, the news on BBC One with Hugh Edwards.
Tonight at 10, victory for Jeremy Corbyn. His name will be automatically included in Labour's leadership ballot. After several hours of tense debate on Labour's ruling body, Mr Corbyn won support for his reading of the rules in the leadership contest.
I'm delighted to say the Labour Party National Executive has decided that an incumbent is automatically on the ballot paper, so I'm on the ballot paper. And we will be campaigning on all the things that matter.
There were scenes of chaos outside the meeting, and Mr Corbyn's challenger accused his supporters of intolerance.
This isn't the kind of gentler politics that we were promised, and I think Jeremy Corbyn needs to condemn these acts.
Angela Eagle was speaking after her constituency office was vandalised overnight. We'll have the latest on the turmoil in the Labour Party. Also on the programme, the removal vans are already in Downing Street on David Cameron's last full day in power before he hands over to Theresa May. The incoming Prime Minister led the tributes from many colleagues at Mr Cameron's final cabinet meeting.
There was a feeling across the cabinet of great pride at what David Cameron's achieved over the last 6 years. Sadness that it's ended in a way perhaps much quicker than people thought.
In Dallas, President Obama attends a memorial service for the 5 policemen shot dead last week. In southern Italy, at least 23 people have died in a collision involving 2 trains. Dozens were hurt. And Rory McIlroy is now one of 4 top golfers not going to Rio because of fears about the Zika virus.
Coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, embarrassment for Celtic. They lose 1-0 to Lincoln Red Imps of Gibraltar in a Champions League qualifier. Brendan Rodgers' first competitive game in charge.
Good evening. It's been another day of turmoil for the Labour Party, at the end of which Jeremy Corbyn won the right to have his name automatically included in the leadership contest without having to be nominated by Labour MPs. The decision was made after several hours of tense debate among members of the party's ruling body, the National Executive Committee. His challenger, Angela Eagle, said she was glad that the NEC had come to a decision and she welcomed the contest ahead, as our political editor Laura Koonsberg tells us.
He wins again, though most Labour MPs think he can never triumph. Jeremy Corbyn will not need their backing in the contest to try to keep his job.
I'm delighted to say the Labour Party National Executive has decided that an incumbent is automatically on the ballot paper, so I'm on the ballot paper.
You've just said if people have a problem with your leadership, they should come and talk to you about it. The point is, they have come and talked to you about it repeatedly over recent months. How do you ever hope to persuade the vast majority of your MPs who just don't think you're up to the job? You've had to fight so hard just to be a candidate. How can you get them on board?
I'm sure Labour MPs will understand that the party has to come together, has to come together in order to present to the British people the options of a different and better way of doing things. I have been elected last year, 10 months ago today, with a very large mandate. I respect that mandate. It's a responsibility I'm carrying out.
And look at their faces. Rapture. Jeremy Corbyn has touched parts of the electorate Labour hasn't reached for a long time. The membership's still growing, and he believes in the race now underway, he will keep their faith. But for months now, Corbyn and the Commons have been locked in conflict, the relationship falling to bits. The leader voted for himself tonight to stay on the ticket, winning by 18 votes to 14.
After more than 5.5 hours of deliberations, in the last few minutes, a decision. Jeremy Corbyn has again taken on the Labour Party establishment and won. He will automatically be on the ballot in Labour's leadership contest in the coming weeks.
The race is already nasty, though. A brick was hurled through the Merseyside office of the MP who wants to replace Mr Corbyn. Then Angela Eagle had to switch venues on a campaign tour because of threats. Protesters still tracked her down. The abuse has been condemned by Angela Eagle and Jeremy Corbyn, but she's ready to take him on.
Well, I'm pleased that the NEC has made a firm decision and that this leadership contest can now go ahead. And I'm looking forward to having a debate with Jeremy Corbyn about the things that really matter to our country in the aftermath of the Brexit vote, where our communities are being really hard hit. This is about uniting the Labour Party and making the case for a Labour Party that isn't just a protest party, but is actually a party that aspires to get into government and make a real difference.
But it's been a huge struggle on both sides of this party, for that is what they are. Even to make their way through what's happened in this extraordinary 10 months. Even before this morning, 63 resignations from the Labour front bench, 172 MPs voting to show their lack of confidence. In the end, 7 hours for the party to agree a way forward.
Good afternoon, lovely to see you all.
And one man fighting on.
Can we have a bit of politeness, please? Can you all make way? Thank you so much.
With faith in his support and his direction, thousands and thousands of members behind him. But if Jeremy Corbyn wins again, one party, one Labour, maybe not for good.
Good luck, Jeremy!
Laura Kunzberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as Laura was saying there, the divisions within Labour were highlighted in Luton today when Angela Eagle was confronted by protesters on her first leadership campaign visit outside London. And as we've heard, her constituency office in Wallasey was damaged overnight when a brick was thrown through one of the windows. The Merseyside Police and Crime Commissioner called it an attack on democracy. My colleague Rita Chakrabarti has spent the day talking to Labour supporters in Wallasey.
A boarded-up window is a common enough sight, but the brick through Angela Eagle's office window is an act of political violence, say her supporters.
Staff describe it to me as vile.
They include the present Police and Crime Commissioner and former Labour MP.
It is an absolutely disgraceful situation that you cannot take part in a democracy without having this kind of threats, the violence of it, the vile nature of the abuse.
For local party members, this is a turbulent time. Along with the brick, there have been claims of intimidation and bullying. These members say those claims are wide of the mark.
No, I don't recognise that picture of the Labour Party meetings I've been to. I've never seen any intimidation. I've never witnessed any homophobia. If I had, I would have stepped in.
It's absolutely crazy to say Jeremy Corbyn is this out-of-touch, crazy Trotskyite nutter.
Both will have a say in the coming leadership contest and both back Jeremy Corbyn over their own constituency MP Angela Eagle. Where's the evidence, they ask, that he's unelectable?
He's articulating policies that people haven't been talking about for many years, like public ownership of the railways and the energy industry, tackling tax avoidance, ending austerity. These are all massively popular policies.
Nearly 400 people have joined the local Labour Party in the last 3 weeks. Signs of healthy participation, say some. Infiltration by extremists, say others.
We are the party of tolerance.
Both these party members think Mr Corbyn should go.
Jeremy's position as leader of the party is completely untenable. He's lost the confidence of 172 MPs. I think Angela offers a better alternative. She offers a positive view for what Labour could be and a positive vision for what Britain can be.
A brick through her office window and a possible vote of no confidence. The mood here in Angela Eagle's own constituency is bitter. It reflects the atmosphere in Labour right across the country, with deep tensions caused by conflicting views as to what the party should stand for. A party suspicious and divided. Labour's leader, whoever it is, has a major task to reunite it. Rita Chakrabarti, BBC News, Wallasey.
Well, David Cameron has chaired his final cabinet meeting on his last full day as Prime Minister. His successor, Theresa May, who will take over tomorrow, led the tributes around the cabinet table at 10 Downing Street today. One minister said that there was great pride in what Mr Cameron had achieved over the past 6 years, mixed with sadness that his premiership had ended far sooner than expected. Mr Cameron reportedly said that he was proud of his time in office. He'll appear at Prime Minister's Questions for the last time tomorrow, as our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar reports.
The van always comes in the end, whoever's Prime Minister. Dreams and plans, like winning the EU referendum, like handing the keys to number 10 to his friend George Osborne next door, packed up with everything else and carried away by the removal men, always somehow too soon. For a moment, David Cameron was glimpsed at a window, a practical politician who'd gambled from the start on a coalition, on Scotland, and then on Europe. So nearly a winner, David Cameron lost everything. And here's the new tenant in Downing Street.
Morning, Prime Minister.
Not quite yet, though she looked pleased with life, fixing relations with Europe, handling economic troubles, uniting a divided Britain, all for the future. She was enjoying the moment, while ministers were obviously thinking ahead.
I'm very optimistic. I'm very positive about Mrs May. I think she'll be a great Prime Minister for this country.
The cars carrying Cameron's cabinet crowded in for the last time. Business on the agenda, but it felt like a leaving do, and everyone thinking of what was next, maybe their next job.
Will you be moving to number 11, Mr Hammond?
Stephen Crabb was the future once, tipped as a possible leader, but he fell behind like all the rest. Michael Gove didn't hang around. He fell out with David Cameron, then fell out of the race. In Cabinet, David Cameron spoke of his pride in the honour of being PM. Ministers had banged the table in salute. Theresa May left after speaking of the warmth and respect David Cameron had earned.
We had some wonderful tributes to a great Prime Minister led by Theresa May, who will be Prime Minister, and by George Osborne. And I think there was a feeling across the Cabinet of great pride at what David Cameron's achieved over the last 6 years.
Tomorrow, Theresa May appoints her own cabinet, who'll rise and who'll survive. George Osborne upset EU leavers with his hard campaign to remain. Can he stay on? And there's speculation Philip Hammond may take over at the Treasury. Boris Johnson's popular in the party, but an old rival. His future is a big question. And Michael Gove is another past rival whose future's in doubt. Andrea Leadsom failed spectacularly in her leadership bid, but Theresa May will want more women in senior posts. There's speculation in every studio, but Prime Ministers can't please everyone.
Any Prime Minister, when they make a cabinet, puts noses out of joint. We're in politics because we want to serve, and actually you like to serve at the highest level, and anybody that tells you that, frankly, is waffling. So at the end of the day, there will be people who will be upset.
Tomorrow, David Cameron will take his last question time in the Commons. There'll be tributes and they'll be sincere. He won 2 elections and 2 referendums before defeat in the European vote carried away all he'd gained and his dream of leading a one-nation, compassionate Conservative government. That's the task Theresa May has pledged to carry on with her new team, and without seeking a new mandate in an early snap election. But for David Cameron, as the removal van loads up and leaves, that's someone else's problem, which may be some consolation, but not much. John Pienaar, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as we heard, there have been many tributes from Mr Cameron's colleagues, keen to underline what they see as his achievements, despite his failure to secure a Remain vote in the referendum. Mr Cameron had billed himself as a one-nation Conservative who at one stage urged his party to stop banging on about Europe. His colleagues point to record employment figures and reforms such as legalising same-sex marriage as some of his notable successes. Our home editor, Mark Easton, has been looking back at the Cameron years.
On his last full day as Prime Minister, it was telling that David Cameron chose to be filmed at the Reach Academy in Feltham, West London. He may be an old Etonian, but he wants to be remembered as a leader who worked to improve the lot of everyone, whatever their background. A one-nation Conservative.
It was his desire, maybe through guilt as an Etonian or whatever, to spread opportunity, to give all people, regardless of race and social class and region, equal and fair opportunities.
He came to power the youngest Prime Minister for almost 200 years, fresh-faced and fizzing with ideas. The big society encouraged active citizenship, volunteering. He created the National Citizen Service.
This is the big society made real.
Cameron wanted to promote civic engagement and clamp down on state dependency. But to some, he was using charity to cover for austerity. Small government was just code for cuts.
I don't believe that the big society just springs up of its own accord. What you need to do is try and help galvanise communities, that where people want to get things done, want to improve their communities, let's help them with that. And that's what this programme is all about.
David Cameron claimed his Tory party was best placed to tackle poverty. It may have raised the hackles of those on the Tory right, but he was happy to be seen as a Prime Minister who would hug a hoodie.
Adult society's response to the hoodie shows how far we are from finding the long-term answers to putting things right.
He believed in the redemptive power of work, introducing welfare reforms that used financial incentives and the stick of sanctions to help push employment to record levels.
His critics accused David Cameron of having waged an ideological war against the poor. His cuts to benefits and services, creating a land of food banks, rising homelessness and profound inequality. He may have tried, some will say, but it wasn't good enough.
David Cameron was a Prime Minister who recognised that poverty was real. He knew it was real in the UK, he knew it caused real harm. I think he was really committed to doing something about it and said a lot about it. But the figures don't stack up. There are 13 million people living in poverty in the UK today. Still, he hasn't met his targets.
David Cameron once said he wanted to know how to put not just money in people's pockets, but joy in their hearts. He started official measurement of well-being and is proudest, perhaps, of having brought in gay marriage. He thought he understood Britain, and that by empowering people to take control of their destiny, he would create a better country. But while eating beans and potato in the school canteen today, he may have reflected it was his misjudgment of the national mood that led to his downfall. Mark Easton, BBC News.
Live to Westminster, and let's talk to Laura Ginsberg, our political editor. Two things to talk about, Laura. The Cameron legacy, if I may, I'll come to that in a moment. I want to ask you about what's happened to the Labour Party tonight and this leadership question back in the hands of the members again.
It is. You know, Hugh, Jeremy Corbyn is either made of Teflon, or he's the most stubborn man in politics, or he's the most determined man in politics, determined to stick to the mandate that he believes he has from thousands and thousands and thousands of party members who put their trust in him. You know, Labour MPs started off complaining privately, then publicly, then resigning from front bench positions in huge number, and then today they threw the party's rule book at him. And still that failed, and he fought all of those challenges off. There may yet be another move in the courts to try to challenge tonight's decision, believe it or not, but not very many people in Westminster think that will fail. So we are into a phase, as you say, where this goes back to the members to make up their minds, with Angela Eagle, the leadership candidate so far, there may be more, who's set to challenge him. Now this time it will be a slightly different race among the members, and a couple of very significant rule changes were also agreed at the Executive Committee decision-making process tonight. Unless people have been a member of the Labour Party since before January, they will not be allowed to vote in this. So there's a 6-month cut-off. Anybody who joined the party in the last 6 months will not have a say. And remember those £3 registered supporters who signed up in their droves, many of them to back Jeremy Corbyn? Well, this time round, they'd have to pay £25 for the same privilege, and there is a time cut-off on that period too. So we are looking at a different leadership race, but part of the dynamic is going to be the same that we've had in Westminster for the last 10 months since Jeremy Corbyn has been leader of the Labour Party. He does not have the backing of most MPs in Westminster, but he believes that he can rely on and excite the support of thousands and thousands of members around the country.
And here we are, Laura, on the eve of David Cameron's departure from Downing Street, in a very real sense that he's trying to, I suppose, define his legacy on his own terms.
Indeed, but I think whether he likes it or not, and I suspect that he does not like it, the events of the last 3 weeks, that monumentous decision that the country took to choose to leave the European Union, will be his biggest legacy. It was his biggest gamble from a politician who liked to make big gestures, and it was his biggest failure. And it will shape and colour his legacy, in part because it doesn't just influence what happens over the road, It doesn't just influence what happens in the other seats of power around the UK, in Holyrood, Stormont or in Cardiff. It doesn't just influence what happens in Brussels across our continent. It will influence, in ways many of which we can't yet imagine, Britain's relationship with the rest of the world for decades and decades to come. That is quite something, and that is not something that every Prime Minister can claim as a positive or frankly a negative legacy, whichever way you see it. And you know, no Prime Minister's place in the history books is set in stone as they wave goodbye from the steps of Number 10, when they walk down that street for the last time, as they bid farewell to the nation as its leader. But you know, I think the chapter about David Cameron in the history books will have the referendum and his failure to win it as its headline.
Laura, we'll talk again tomorrow, I'm sure, but thanks very much for now. Laura Kuenssberg there with her thoughts at Westminster. Now, President Obama has been leading the tributes to the 5 policemen who were shot dead in Dallas last week. Speaking at a memorial service this evening, Mr. Obama said that the violence threatened to expose the deepest fault lines in American democracy. Our correspondent Nick Bryant is in Dallas tonight. We can join him now.
Hugh, this is the 11th time that President Obama has addressed a city reeling from a multiple shooting, and his voice came with intense frustration.
Dallas still bears the wounds of last week's shootings. Bullet holes in downtown office buildings. Policemen reliving the horror of the sniper attack which killed their colleagues. Into this traumatized city came the country's first black president, joining his predecessor George W. Bush, a resident of Dallas, for the singing of a national anthem at a time of national division. Barack Obama addressed a community mourning the killing of 5 officers, but also a country in the midst of widespread protest directed at the police. It was a plea not so much for unity, but for understanding.
It's hard not to think sometimes that the center won't hold and that things might get worse. I understand. I understand how Americans are feeling. But Dallas, I'm here to say we must reject such despair. I'm here to insist that we are not as divided as we seem. And I know that because I know America. I know how far we've come against impossible odds.
The speech balanced praise for the heroism of police with criticism of racial discrimination. But what was striking was its weary tone. With tears in his eyes, with a sometimes shaky voice, this gifted speaker acknowledged the limitations of his own words in bridging the racial divide.
Can we find the character as Americans to open our hearts to each other? I confess that sometimes I too experience doubt. I've been to too many of these things. I've seen too many families go through this.
The election of Barack Obama brought with it the hope that America could finally overcome the legacy of slavery and segregation. But despite his prayers and those of the people who listened to his speech, no one man can repair the racial breach.
That was Nick Bryant reporting there from Dallas. Now, an international tribunal has ruled that China has no legal right to claim islands and reefs in the South China Sea. The Chinese have been building huge artificial islands in recent years to back up those claims. But the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague has ruled against Beijing, a verdict immediately rejected by the Chinese as null and void. As our World Affairs editor John Simpson reports now, it's likely to add to the significant tensions in the region.
China didn't hide its feelings today. These pictures were shown on state television to demonstrate how strong China is and how angry. Even the diplomats were using belligerent language. China will take resolute action, he says, if any party dares to challenge China's interests. Interests, that is, in these specks of land and the waters round them, through which trillions of pounds worth of trade passes. Overflying the South China Sea can be scary, as a BBC team found last year.
This is Chinese Navy. You are threatening the security of our station.
Here's what China's done on just one island. This was March 2014. 5 months later, the reef's been transformed and much of the coral destroyed. By January last year, it was an artificial island, all totally illegal, according to The Hague. The Spratly Islands hearing lasted 3 years. China boycotted it. The situation in the South China Sea is complex. This is the area claimed by the Philippines, who won the case today. But plenty of others have their claims: Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam and Taiwan. This is the so-called 9-dash line, China's claim, far bigger and more sweeping than any of them. The Philippines bolstered their claim to the Spratlys by turning an old wreck into a military base. A Chinese foreign affairs specialist in Beijing told us the Hague ruling was dangerous.
If there is miscalculation on the part of the Philippines or especially the United States, and there will maybe chances for accidents which may lead to military conflict.
Philippine generals observing an exercise on board a US Navy ship. The US has a military treaty with the Philippines which gives them American protection.
No one wants this to come to conflict. We do have concerns about the tensions there. There has been some activity that's raised concerns, but overall I think our assessment is that there isn't any party to this dispute that wants to see open conflict.
Maybe China's just reacting angrily so as to warn off the other countries from pressing their claims in the South China Sea. But perhaps China now feels it's so strong it can force its neighbours to do what it wants. John Simpson, BBC News.
Let's have a brief look at some of the day's other news stories now then. And the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, has defended the bank's impartiality in evidence to MPs, following claims that it overstepped its remit in the run-up to the EU referendum. On Thursday, the bank will announce whether interest rates will be cut to soften any adverse economic effects. 2 people have died in a shooting in the village of Magdalen in Norfolk. They're believed to be Stephen and Alison Lancaster, who are in their late 40s, and police say there's no evidence to suggest that anyone else has been involved in the incident. Bernie Sanders has officially endorsed his rival Hillary Clinton as the Democratic US presidential candidate. At a campaign rally in New Hampshire, Mr. Sanders said it was vital to prevent the Republican Donald Trump from getting into the White House in November. In southern Italy, at least 23 people have died in a head-on collision between 2 passenger trains. Dozens of people were hurt, many of them seriously. It happened near the city of Bari. From there, our correspondent Dan Johnson has sent this report.
The devastating result of a deadly head-on collision. An impact so sudden and so powerful, it's hard to tell the 2 trains apart. Each had 4 carriages, many of them torn from the track, some completely obliterated. Most passengers had no warning and no chance.
I was thrown forward. I don't know what happened. It all happened so quickly. I saw my mother on the ground, my father and my sister bleeding. The people on the train helped us. I'm 8 months pregnant.
This is a rural stretch of a regional commuter line, difficult for rescue teams to reach. A makeshift medical centre set up in the olive groves treated some of the survivors. Others were flown to hospital. That meant a desperate search for loved ones.
There is no news from the hospitals, also the Potenza one. I want to be optimistic and hopeful. I have no news, the mobile phone is off. They say 20 people have died.
Look closer at the wreckage and you can understand why. The force involved was immense, like a plane had crashed, one witness said. If this had happened earlier in the morning, even more may have died. But this is still one of Italy's worst rail accidents. The Prime Minister came to see it for himself after he'd earlier promised a full investigation.
I want to express my condolences to the families, and I have ordered, with no holding back, to find out who is responsible for what happened. I think absolute clarity must be made on this. We will not stop until we understand what happened. Now is the time for tears.
Tears for the dead, prayers for the injured. And as recovery work goes on here into the night, questions about how this could have happened.
And that recovery effort is still going on here into the night. This is a privately run line with a decent safety record, so the key question is how could two trains have ended up on the same line speeding towards each other? The Prime Minister has promised that he will get answers for the victims' families and for this country.
Dan, thanks for the update again. Dan Johnson there for us in southern Italy. Now, the Olympic Games in Rio will get underway in under a month's time, but the world's top 4 golf players will not be there. Rory McIlroy has defended his decision, which he took because of fears over the Zika virus. Our sports correspondent Richard Conway has the story.
It's under a month now until the start of the Rio Olympics. But one of the biggest issues facing organisers is a virus, one that's threatening to overshadow the world's greatest sporting spectacle. Tens of thousands of Brazilians have contracted Zika, which has flu-like symptoms. But it's also the cause of microcephaly, a disorder which leads to babies being born with abnormally small heads and brain defects. The world's top 4 golfers say they will not play the Olympic course built on reclaimed swampland and near sewage-polluted waterways, given their worries of contracting the virus. Today, ahead of the Open Championship, Rory McIlroy defended his decision to stay away.
I didn't get into golf to try and grow the game. I tried to get into golf to win championships and win major championships, and I have no regrets about it. And I'll probably watch the Olympics, but I'm not sure golf will be one of the events I'll watch.
The World Health Organization insists the Games should go ahead as planned. In rare access to their headquarters, the organization's head of emergencies told me potential Olympians should think again if they're planning to withdraw.
There's absolutely no question. Your risk of getting Zika is very low. If you take specific measures as an athlete, you can make this risk very, very low to you and to your family. It's a manageable risk. The Olympics are something very, very special. Don't miss it for the wrong reason.
Some health experts are also concerned with the potential of the Games to spread Zika. So far, it's known to have been transmitted by mosquitoes in 65 countries. But with 500,000 visitors expected to attend the Olympics, it's feared it could advance further. That's because Zika can also be transmitted through sexual contact with infected partners. In the past 18 months, there have been 14 reported cases in the US of the virus being transmitted this way.
The Olympics bring visitors from literally every country on Earth. If you were trying to design a system to spread a virus, bringing everyone from every country together is the best way to do it. You could not have a more efficient way of spreading disease.
More stars may yet decide to stay away from Rio, but as far as Olympic organisers are concerned, the show must go on. Richard Conway, BBC News.
Iceland, which enjoyed its share of football success at Euro 2016, is about to make a different kind of impact, this time in the world of modern art. One of its most acclaimed artists, Ragnar Kjartansson, is holding his first major exhibition in the United Kingdom. His show takes in performance art and painting and video installation. Our arts editor, Will Gompertz, has been to meet him.
This has become Ragnar Kjartansson's signature work, an hour-long 9-screen romantic lament. It marks a divorce from his first wife, who provided the words, which he performs and sets to music with friends from the Icelandic art scene.
What is the big idea you're exploring?
It's like some kind of a Chekhovian state of mind. I think I'm exploring. Just like that it is beautiful and sad to be a human being.
Meet the parents. That's Ragnar's mum and dad acting in the first all-Icelandic full-length feature film, which the artist has made part of his own performance piece.
I find fiction and reality just so, it is so intertwined in our lives always. And I just remember this like thing of like being raised in the theater when there's somebody like gotta go on stage and then you're like
This work casts a satirical eye on the ad man's ideal of Western culture, a capitalist cliché of aspiration with a dark side of debt and disappointment.
Of course, there came a change of attitude within Iceland after the crash, which was very positive. Like for me, like you really lost faith in government, and then there came like all these scandals in the church also while it was happening, and like all the pillars of society were really less to stay, and the whole financial system, it all just crumbled.
Did that then create the environment for artists to flourish?
Yeah, it created an environment for artists to flourish. It gained a bit of confidence because it really established like in Iceland there has always been a lot of respect for the poet. The poet stands out of society and is a little bit irritated by society and therefore, yeah, speaks some truth.
He likes opposites and awkwardness, such as creating this quasi-Edwardian scene set against the Barbican's brutalist facade. Whimsical? Yes, but important too. Ragnar Karlsson is part of a new wave of Icelandic artists, writers, musicians and filmmakers who've helped lift the country out of the doldrums by developing a vibrant, flourishing, creative economy. Will Gompertz, BBC News.
Well, a quick reminder that Newsnight's coming up on BBC Two. Here's Evan.
We're leading on Labour's internal fight this evening. I'll be sitting down with leadership challenger Angela Eagle and asking if the factions in the party now are resigned to it splitting in two. Join me now on BBC Two.
Newsnight with Evan here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.